If you don't get your taxes in on time, the IRS comes after you, they fine you, you got penalties you have to pay. But what about them? They don't seem to want to answer their questions. And were they targeting Tea Party groups? And what's the story? Well, after all these months, we still don't know because they're stonewalling.
But there is one thing that we have learned. The scandal went all the way to IRS headquarters in Washington. Jennifer Wishon has the story.
In the beginning, the White House insisted the IRS scandal was confined to a rogue operation in the agency's Cincinnati office. But now it's clear the scandal was rooted in the nation's capital.
We're following the facts. They undeniably now lead to Washington.
During a recent hearing, the House Watchdog Committee uncovered a connection between the extra scrutiny of applications for tax-exempt status of Tea Party groups and the IRS's chief counsel, William J. Wilkins, who is one of just 2 IRS employees appointed by the president.
I also recall a discussion about
Carter Hull, a lawyer who retired from the IRS after 48 years of service, told the committee he was directed to send his recommendations about the tax applications of Tea Party groups to the office of the chief counsel.
We know that when you put this much discretion and this much discretionary power in the hands of the few, eventually it may well be abused for partisan political purposes.
The White House now calls the IRS scandal phony. However, soon after it broke, President Obama appointed Treasury Secretary Jack Lew to investigate.
There is no evidence of any political decision maker who was involved in any of those decisions.
But when pressed by the host of Fox News Sunday, he wouldn't say if anyone has asked Wilkins if he was involved with targeting Tea Party groups. Tom McCluskey works for the Family Research Council, a nonprofit conservative group that was audited. He tells CBN News political targeting by the IRS is nothing new and says the agency has become little more than a political arm of the party in charge of the White House.
These are American citizens being targeted. They're not phony people. This is not a grass or an AstroTurf type of scandal. This is a scandal that has actual roots and shows just the inherent problems at the IRS.
And the investigation of this scandal is far from over. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Well, Jay Sekulow is head of the American Center for Law and Justice, and he's with us now, I believe, from our studios in Nashville. Jay, who are you suing? You're suing the IRS on behalf of whom?
41 different groups, Pat. They include Tea Party groups. They can also include just some conservative organizations, an educational group that was caught up in the dragnet, a pro-life organization. So what started as the Tea Party, actually, when they developed what's called the BOLO list, the Be on the Lookout list, if you had certain keywords, including liberty, life, constitution, you were put in this dragnet. And right now we have 41 plaintiffs. The government offered a quick resolution to some of our cases. They said if our clients would forego 9% of their constitutional rights of free speech, in other words, you're allowed to engage into 49% political activity. If you go to 40%, we'll give you granted a expedited review. Now, these applications, Pat, have been pending for 3 years. Let me show you the response that your American Center for Law and Justice that you founded gave the IRS in response to their quick expedited review. This was the letter and documents we sent to the IRS saying, we're not going to take your expedited review. These applications have been pending for 3 years, and we want them approved. Also, as the report pointed out, we now know that everything is pointing to the Office of Chief Counsel, which is an office I worked in when I graduated law school a long time ago. That was my first job out of law school. You remember that. We've talked about that before. Yeah. I was a trial lawyer for Chief Counsel's office. So it's now the Chief Counsel's office involved. That's a political appointee of the president. So this is certainly moving up the ladder rapidly, actually.
Well, you know, this Lois Lerner, she was with the Federal Election Commission, and she went after my campaign mercilessly, and I think she hates evangelicals or something. I don't know, you know, personally, but is she going to get away with stonewalling the way she's done?
Well, you know, in your particular case, remember they were asking Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North about what type of prayers he engaged in when he was meeting with you. That prayer language still comes up, by the way, in questions that are asked of pro-life organizations. In fact, in one of the letters that went to one of the pro-life groups that we're representing, They were told that the information that they're relying on, that life is sacred, is not supported by science. And they also wanted information about prayer vigils and things like this. So, she took the Fifth Amendment. What's interesting, she took it in a rather bizarre way, so I'm not quite sure whether she waived it or not. But here's what I would do at this point. Now that we've got people in Washington pointing much higher up the ladder into the Office of Chief Counsel, the President's appointee's office, I think you give Lois Lerner immunity and you let her talk. And I suspect when she talks, we're going to find out that during this election year, when all this was going on, midterm elections, that it was being directed by the Office of Chief Counsel. We know that they took control of these cases. Everybody thought that this 48-year veteran at the IRS, Carter Hall, was the main culprit here from the legal side, but he was just as, he made clear in his testimony, following orders from the Chief Counsel's office.
Well, you think it was the Chief Counsel, it wasn't Lois Lerner? I mean, it bypassed her and went direct to the White House? Am I hearing that?
Oh, I think Lois Lerner had a lot to do with it, Pat, and she's had an animus for decades in her government service against Christian organizations. Remember, when she was in charge of the FEC, they were telling a candidate that if he didn't run for office again, they wouldn't find him, put a fine in place against his campaign. So they've had these kind of statements before coming out of people she's worked with and from herself. But you got to go a step further here. We know for a fact that the IRS Chief Counsel's office was asked to take these cases over or took these cases over. Somebody needs to ask the IRS Chief Counsel, William Wilkins, what was your involvement? When did you know about this? Why didn't you stop it? What was your engagement level on this? And Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury, was ordered by President Obama to make a thorough investigation of what happened and hold those that were responsible liable for their actions. He has not and will not ask the IRS Chief Counsel, who reports to him, a presidential appointee, he will not ask him what he knew and when he knew it. And that, to me, is outrageous, and that we got on the Sunday talk shows with Chris Wallace. That's outrageous. People should be saying no. Now he needs to go before Congress, testify under oath.
Can you get this Chief Counsel on the stand under oath? Can you depose him in this case you're dealing with?
We absolutely have the authority under the federal rules of civil procedure to certainly depose the head of the Office of Chief Counsel now that we know the Chief Counsel's office was involved. So yes, we will depose him. We'll depose his deputies. It's an office that has 1,600 lawyers, but what's a little bit not true about some of that statement is it's not that there's just 1,600 lawyers. There's multiple levels of review. But here's what we know. Someone high up, at least the associate counsel's level, which is like the deputies, took these cases over and took them out of career lawyers who had been with the IRS for 48 years, or at that point, 46 years. So what we need to find out, and we will ask the Chief Counsel this under oath, what his involvement was, when he was aware of it, and why was it that he allowed it to go on if, in fact, he was aware? Because the second round of questioning, which came out of Chief Counsel's office, was the most troubling and most damaging. And, Pat, there was a meeting with the IRS, and including Chief Counsel, and 2 days later, he was at the White House, and then a few days after that, we get the new letters. So maybe it's just coincidental timing, but in Washington, we don't tend to believe in coincidences too much. So we're going to take this all the way up in discovery against the IRS, and we'll see where it goes. But, they've got a lot of explaining to do at this point, and they need to, I think Congress needs to push aggressively to get more testimony from not just the agents, but also from these higher-ups at the IRS.
Who came up with the Cincinnati gambit? Where did that come from? They were the one.
I think Lois Lerner and her team, in conjunction with the White House, figured this was the way they were going to get ahead of the Inspector General's report by blaming this on two low-level IRS agents. The problem is, as someone that represented those agents, I knew right away that, number one, they didn't have the authority to do what they did in these particular cases by lumping them all together and drafting the questions the way they did. So I knew just from my experience that that wasn't correct. So I think Lois Lerner, in conjunction with the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, and we know there were conversations also between the IRS Commissioner and Stephanie Cutter, who was running the Obama campaign at the time. I think we've got to ask those questions. Why did Lois Lerner blame these agents? Why did Jay Carney go out and say it's two low-level career bureaucrats? Which, by the way, Jack Lew repeated this weekend, which we know is not true. Lois Lerner was not a career bureaucrat. She was a high-level government employee. Holly Paz was not just a career bureaucrat. She was a high-level government employee. And now the Office of Chief Counsel, these aren't low-level bureaucrats. These are senior lawyers, may involve the Chief Counsel himself, who's the most senior lawyer, who also, by the way, was the counsel to Jeremiah Wright, President Obama's pastor, for an audit in 2008 over what they were deeming inappropriate political activities, at least the IRS was alleging. The lawyer for Jeremiah Wright is William Wilkins, the chief counsel. And by the way, Lois Lerner's lawyer was partners of the current White House chief counsel.
Jay, who's going to hold these people accountable? So you find all this stuff. So they've done all these bad things. So what?
Well, three things. One, the Congress, of course, is investigating, and I think the oversight there is critical. Number two, this is a federal lawsuit where we're not just asking for an injunction for things to stop. We're not just asking for the exemptions to be granted. We're asking for damages. Some of these groups suffered real and significant damages. And the government can't get away with just violating civil rights. Remember, it was the Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, who said this may be criminal activity involved at the IRS. Now, by the way, we've not had one client contacted by the IRS as of the time I'm on the broadcast with you today. Not one has been contacted by the FBI investigating this. So the IRS is in a free fall. They're not responding to anything internal, the internal process right now. These groups should be granted exemption immediately. But there's going to be damages to pay, and this is serious federal litigation. And we've sued individuals as well as the government itself. So there's a lot going on. In fact, the government asked for an extension of time in which to respond because they're trying to sort out who's going to represent who. There's so many defendants in this case.
Well, we'd sure better pray for you. I don't think they're going to let you go unscathed without if you hurt them and they don't respond. I remember that great statement that my father used to say, quoting from the old days of Rome, you don't strike the king unless you kill him. So you struck the king, I hope.
Well, I'll tell you this, Pat. In this particular case, the king's admitted liability, so it makes the case a lot easier. They're the ones that came out and said what we did was wrong. Well, so that's going to really help the case.
Well, power to you, buddy.
Thanks.
God bless you. Jay Sekulow,
Appreciate
ladies and gentlemen, a dear friend of the General Counsel of the American Center for Law Justice. Isn't it shocking?
It really is shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, the depth of it is...
Well, pray for Jay on this one, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the government has made another major breakthrough in the fight against child molestation and prostitution, sex trafficking. This is a good story, not a bad story. Lee Webb has you heard about it yesterday, but now this is an expanded edition to give you more details.
That's right, Pat. The FBI says authorities rescued dozens of young people, almost all of them girls from 13 to 17 years old. Many of them had run away from home and quickly fallen into prostitution. Dale Hurd has the story.
In Hayward, California, this 15-year-old prostitute picked up by police said she was scared and asked if she could call her mother. This 13-year-old says she ran away from a group home. Patrick Mims is with an advocacy group that helps girls who become prostitutes.
Foster homes and group homes, and they're leaving these places as fast as they're sent to them.
In a massive 3-day FBI sweep over the weekend, federal authorities rescued 105 children from forced prostitution across the country.
One of the most prevalent, violent, and unconscionable crimes in this country.
The FBI also arrested 150 pimps in 76 American cities. The largest numbers of children were rescued in Detroit, Milwaukee, Denver, New Orleans, and San Francisco.
Traffickers are preying on youth with low self-esteem and minimal social support.
Federal officials said many of the children were sold into prostitution online, at truck stops, or on city streets. They're often homeless or in foster care.
When these children are recovered from the control of their pimps, typically their only possessions are the clothes that they are wearing.
The Justice Department estimates nearly 450,000 children run away from home each year, and that 1/3 of teens living on the street will be lured toward prostitution within 48 hours of leaving home, and some are recruited right out of foster care facilities. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
A billionaire Saudi prince says the American shale oil revolution could become a threat to the Saudi economy. Prince Al-Walid is well known at international investment circles. He says the U.S. oil boom will take business away from Saudi Arabia and other OPEC countries. The prince gave his warning in a letter to the Saudi oil ministry. But he doesn't share Prince Al-Walid's concern. The Saudi economy depends heavily on income from its oil sales. So do other Middle Eastern countries. All of them could be hurt financially by the shale oil business from the U.S. and other countries as well. Pat, what about that?
Well, I understand about 92% of all of their income at the Saudis comes from oil, and some of those big fields are starting to diminish, deplete. That great Gowar field is the one we've heard about is starting to deplete, and I think this shale oil is just shocking them because no longer will OPEC be ruling the roost in terms of oil pricing, and this means that the Saudis can't be the big player any longer. So with the Russians, the United States, and others, they're losing their dominance. But Prince Alawid is a huge investor in companies like Citicorp and others. He is certainly himself divested, but his net worth is north of $20 billion. I don't know exactly how much it is now because things go up and down, but he's been a very, very shrewd investor, lives out in a tent in the desert and plays like a old Arab, but he is a very sophisticated investor, and so what he says you ought to take seriously.
Welcome to Washington for this CBN News Break. The best-selling book, Heaven is for Real, is going to become a movie. Actor Greg Kinnear will star as Pastor Todd Burpo, whose son Colton almost died during an emergency operation when he was only 4 years old. Colton says at the time, he saw heaven.
Jesus came to me and said, "Colton, you need to go back." Even though I didn't want to go back, he said that he was answering my dad's prayer.
The book describes Colton's experiences in heaven, and the movie will debut around Easter next year. Another Christian company has lost its battle to opt out of the Obamacare birth control mandate. An appeals court said the Mennonite-owned Conestoga Wood Specialties Corporation does not qualify for a religious exemption. The judge said it is a secular for-profit company with no formal ties to a religious group. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.